are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. And now for the consequences. In the wake of Turkey's intentional downing of a Russian military aircraft over Syrian airspace, the Russia-Turkey relationship is in steep decline. Ankara says it only acted in self-defense, but it appears to be protecting the Islamic State. To crosstalk the downing of the Russian jet, I'm joined by my guest, Charles Shoebridge in London. He is a security analyst and former British Army officer. And in Washington, we cross to Yenal Kucuker. He is the program manager of the Turkish Heritage Organization. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Charles, if I can go to you first here. We have the Turks admitting that they intentionally shot down this plane over Syrian airspace. Now, what do they want to achieve by doing that? Because if you add up all of the pieces that we have been given of information, Turkey itself looks like the aggressor.
Yes, that's right. But of course, we need to put this in the context of a long history of Turkey pursuing, actually, in some ways, diverse geopolitical interests in Syria and, of course, in the surrounding region. And I mean diverse because some of these, shall we say, pursued interests seem to be the interests of some of its leaders, some of the military, and indeed what might be called the national interests of Turkey. So, for example, Turkey has been very active, and I think this is acknowledged now even by almost all of its NATO allies, in supporting what in the West would be called extremist, Islamist, indeed terrorist organisations within Syria and beyond. And it's doing that, of course, for its own narrow national objectives, because it sees, for example, Assad as a rival in some cases, but more than that, it sees its danger, that's to say Turkey's danger, coming not from IS or other terrorist groups, but from Kurds, of course, fighting for independence within its own borders. And but that's a long-standing consideration. But what's new here is a willingness, perhaps not amongst everybody in Turkish leadership or in military or senior political roles, but a willingness to challenge other states, and especially such a powerful state as Russia. That's what's new, and of course that's what's providing a game changer, not just in Turkish and Russian relations, but really I think in Turkey behind the scenes relations between Turkey and certainly many of its Western allies as well.
Can you explain what Ankara really wants to achieve here? Because the shooting down of that plane was extremely provocative, and in some cases, international scholars of law would say it was an act of war as well. I mean, the plane was shot down over Syrian airspace when the plane was moving away from the Turkish border here. I mean, if anything, this looked like an ambush. Common sense dictates that, at least. What does Ankara want to accomplish by this? And does it really want to have such bad relations with Russia? Because that's on the horizon, and it's going to stay that way for a while. Go ahead in Washington.
Well, yes, it's certainly an unfortunate situation, but I sort of have to disagree with the outcome. Turkey is often misunderstood in the sense that Turkey has been dealing with the Syrian issue for the past 5 years, whether it's with the refugees, whether it's with dealing with Daesh, or the terrorism and everything else. And for the past 5 years, the international community sort of looked away, and now since the Daesh terrorism starts spreading all over Europe, all of a sudden there's this urgency to do something about ISIS. And that's why I think Turkey is misunderstood. And considering Turkey's geopolitical situation, bordering Syria, Iraq, and Iran, that region is already volatile. There's all kinds of ethnic issues that has been going on for the past century or so. And Turkey is in a very difficult situation. And while you get close to one ally, it basically puts you up until somebody else.
You're really not answering my question. Why did Ankara shoot down the plane, and what does it hope to gain from it? I mean, everything you said there is very interesting. Is that a lot of critics of Turkey would say that Turkey's one of the bad players in all of this. I mean, helping, funding, training, a porous border, letting people into Syria and letting them back, giving them cover. I mean, I can go on a long time. And plus, we can talk about the politics of petrol and oil and money and certain cliques in Turkey that are benefiting from that. I mean, you're right. Turkey's misunderstood, but it has a very vast and what some would call a duplicitous agenda. Go ahead.
Well, going back to your initial question, what was the motivation behind that? First of all, if you go back to history, I've been looking at some of the information that's been published all around in different media sources, both in Turkey and in the United States. Turkey has been warning Russia over the airspace violations for quite a bit of time. And that basically goes back to NATO. They summoned the Russian ambassador. They talked about this issue, and Russia officially apologized back in October, actually. And prior to this, if you remember, there was another shutdown of unmanned aircraft over the Turkey's border, in the southeastern border again. So this has been going for quite some time, and Turkey actually made it very clear officially that if this continues, there will be repercussions. So
Okay.
it's not,
Okay, but
I believe, based on this information, it's not something that happened overnight and once in a while it got
Okay,
shut.
well, that's
Although
fair.
the information is still being eliminated.
Okay,
Yeah.
but Charles, I mean, given that if there was a violation of airspace for 17 seconds, okay, that's being bandied about right now here. But does that violation of airspace constitute a threat to the national security of Turkey? I mean, that's the fundamental question here. And at the same time, everyone is aware, everyone is very painfully aware, depending on where you sit and where you stand, that Russian air power is in that airspace, and it is invited there under international law by Damascus, legally there. So, I mean, is anybody surprised that there could be minor violations? I agree, it shouldn't happen, but it does every once in a while happen. But does it warrant this kind of response? Go ahead.
No, the key point is, as you suggested, and indeed as Lavrov said, and indeed my good self even said, you know, within a couple of hours of this on RT myself, that there were really 2 points to consider here at least. One of those is, did the aircraft cross into Turkish airspace? And of course it's correct that Turkey has the right to defend or even police, maintain its national sovereignty by policing its airspace in this way. But also, if you're going to deploy deadly force in the way that Turkey did, literally deadly force in this case, because of course the pilot ended up being killed, then it means that you really need to be under threat yourself. Now, Turkey absolutely clearly knows that those Russian aircraft are there not to attack Turkey. Now, some people in Turkey, perhaps some in the military and certainly some in the government, may say, yes, but they were attacking Turkish interests because, of course, Turkey, behind the scenes, and even overtly in some cases, have been supporting terrorist groups, including the Turkmen groups that this plane was attacking at the time in Syria. So there are the two issues. Did it cross into the border? And even if it did, was it therefore a threat, and did it justify shooting down? And in any of those, shall we say, calculations, the answer must be no. And so therefore, you have to begin to wonder really whether we're even mistaken to apply this kind of rational thinking anyway, because it may be that it's difficult to know from this stage, at this stage, as an outside observer, the degree to which this kind of decision-making into engaging foreign aircraft has been delegated. It's hard to believe or hard to imagine that the top military echelon within Turkey would have wanted this potentially highly dangerous confrontation with Moscow. And one wonders, therefore, whether people on the ground at a relatively local level have taken this decision in order to send a message, or indeed whether it's come personally from Erdogan himself, for example, to send a message. But it's a very dangerous game and situation, of course.
You know, in Washington, I mean, if Turkey wanted Russia not to continue any bombing raids in that area, well, it really is failed on that, because Russia, in return, pounded that area and made it very clear of what its intentions are. I know that it may be in Ankara and other capitals in the region, there are different colors or shades of what would be called the terrorist group here. Again, as I stressed, and one can disagree with it, but the Syrian government has invited Russia in to protect its sovereignty and to fight terrorist groups. Now, Russia deems some of the activities going on there as protecting terrorism, and at the same time, I don't think it's any coincidence, and it's really going to be hard to not convince me that otherwise, is that Russia started destroying the oil infrastructure of inside of Syria, that where you have exports of oil by ISIS and other groups going to Turkey. And so I think there's a causality here. Somebody in Turkey is very angry about that. Would you address that issue, please?
The downing of the Russian jet brings up all the history now. And as I was digging through some of the information, I wanted to remind the viewers that in June 2012, a Turkish military jet was downed by Syrians, and Turkey did make a fuss about this, but not to the extent of going all the way to NATO and implementing anything else. So this has been going on for some time, and there were a lot of civilians that were being killed as a
Erdogan
result
said
of
the same issue that you're mentioning in 2012 was Erdogan. He was prime minister. Now he is president. He said back in 2012 that kind of behavior isn't warranted, but now he does believe it's warranted. Can you explain to our viewers the contradiction there?
I believe there's something else that I think we need to point out here, that the conflicting mechanism that was put together between Russia and the U.S. is not something, as far as I've been informed, it's not hasn't been implemented within the all sides that are fighting against ISIS.
Because,
in this case,
because Turkey
US.
didn't agree to it. Russia asked, Turkey said no. Don't you think the Turks should have said that
Peter,
yes now?
Peter, right. There are a lot of disagreements when it comes to what should happen, what should take place in Syria, as we all know, even between U.S. and Turkey as allies, and they disagree on whether Assad should stay or he should go. So there's a lot of disagreements. And Turkey, as a country that has been dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis, the terrorism and everything else for the past 5 years, and spending more than $8 billion, it's really frustrated. And I think some of the decisions that are being made can be a result of that frustration and exhaustion for dealing with the issue for so long. And
don't you find that very dangerous? Don't you find that very dangerous? It sounds like a moody child. I mean, this has to be far more than just wanting to change the game, because you can change the game in a really bad way. Shooting down a Russian aircraft is not a good idea. I think you would agree.
No, I agree. Shooting down any kind of aircraft is not a good idea at all. And I wish this would have never happened. We wouldn't be talking about this issue. But it did happen. So we need to talk about this and see. So we need to talk about this and analyze and see how maybe Turkey and Russia or the other allies can avoid similar situations in the future. Because what it looks like in the future, there will be more bombing raids. Today, as we know, President Hollande is in Moscow talking with President Putin as to how to cooperate on this issue.
Okay,
he was here in Washington
gents, I have to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the downed Russian jet over Syria. Stay with RT.